Okay, hi everybody, welcome to another population ecology video. Today what we're going to look at is we're going to look at I want to remind you first that a population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same geographic area at the same time. So when we talk about this, we're talking about same species, same place, same time. Factors that influence how that population, that same species, same place, same time, grows in number. And we're also going to talk about how that same species, same place, same time is distributed in space, the vital statistics of that population, and the density of that population. Populations are characterized by three major characteristics. So let's take a look. We have density, which is the number of individuals per unit of area, dispersion, how the individuals are spaced within the population, and demographics, the vital statistics of that population. When we talk about these three things that characterize any population, I want you to keep this in mind, that density, dispersion, and demographics do not happen by chance. They are the result, they are influenced by interacting biological processes. What's that? What's a biological process? Well, it's any process that is produced through one living thing and interacting with another. Now, it could be a living thing with the environment, it could be a living thing with another living thing, but since we're talking about a population, we're going to talk about how species within a species, how they interact with other members of that species and how they interact with the environment. And what we're going to see resulting from that is a certain density, a certain dispersion, how they're arranged in space, and that's going to cause certain statistics, vital statistics for that species. Population size can change, and population sizes can change because of dearths. What's a dearth? Births, immigration, which are adding individuals to the population through births and immigration, or removing individuals from a population through death and emigration. So there's two ways that you can remove individuals from the population and two ways that you can add individuals to a population. Okay, factors that influence population size over time would be the accessibility to abiotic factors such as sunlight, precipitation, soil, and nutrients. And notice that these abiotic factors are not evenly distributed through our planet. The Earth has a curved surface, so you're going to get an unequal distribution of sunlight. You're going to get, or I should say, an uneven distribution of sunlight. Sunlight's going to hit the equator more directly, so you're going to get a hotter, drier climate the closer you get to the equator, and you're also going to get a really wet environment such as on the equator because of patterns of wind and moisture and wind currents. You're also going to get cooler as you move away from the equator because that same sunlight is going to be spread out over a larger area because of the curved surface of the Earth. You're also going to get seasonal changes because of the tilt of the Earth on its axis, that sometimes the South Pole is tilted towards the sun and sometimes the North Pole or the Northern Hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, and that's going to give rise to seasonal changes. And organisms, species, have evolved different characteristics and behaviors that meet the needs of these types of environments. Biotic factors, other living organisms that can change the population, the size of a population. That could include the amount of prey that a species has access to. It could be the amount of competitors that are also living in that same area. It could be the amount of predators or parasites that could increase or decrease the population size. There are also intrinsic factors such as developing an adaptation that helps the organism to survive. Now, we can also characterize within talking about, density, dispersion, and demographics, we can talk about geographical limitations to that population, and they're due to these abiotic and biotic factors. So you're not going to see an organism or a species such as a polar bear be able to really survive outside of its habitat, such as in the rainforest. That population is not going to do well because of the difference in abiotic and biotic factors. Species, have adapted to their biomes or their habitats for thousands of years. Okay. You can also get population sizes that change in their range. So, and let me go back to here. When we talk about the range of a population, we're really just talking about geographically where it exists. Okay? So, and we can see that species only exist in certain ranges because of the adaptations that they have acquired over the years. You can get changes in ranges, changes in ranges, due to what are called range expanses and contractions. And that's got to be due to what's called changing environment. And whether this happens naturally or whether or not it's because of the impact that human beings have had on the environment, it's happening. And we can see some evidence of that when we look at the woodlands. So woodlands, about 15,000 years ago, were much more prevalent down here at lower elevations 15,000 years ago because of the climate. Now, today what we find is that the woodlands are not as popular in that same elevation because they've been outcompeted by these grasslands and desert scrubs and chaparrals. Okay, so that's a range that we see that has changed over time due to a change of environment. Another change that we see that comes about through changes of a range or due to a change in the environment is when we look at endangered species. That's the number one cause of the species being endangered is the change to its habitat, which limits its range. You can't take a New Guinea tree kangaroo and put it in, Alaska. It's just not going to do well there. Okay, so also places species at risk. So they're just, we can also talk about populations in terms of where they live, what range. Now, getting back to locally, how they're dispersed within that area, we get into what's called dispersion or population spacing. So here we can see that patterns within a population and how they're arranged in space is we see three basic patterns emerge. One is clumped, random, and uniform. And what's really cool is that the variations that occur here are really give us a nice insight into the interactions that these organisms have with their environment and the social interactions of the individuals within that population. So you might say that, the clumped dispersion here of wolves benefits that wolves as a whole because they can take down a larger prey when they're hunting together. Here we can see whether it's oak trees or maple trees that seem to appear to be more random. That's because maybe their seeds are dispersed by the wind. Here we can see a uniform distribution because there might be some territorial here for these, I think they're empire penguins there. Okay, so the clump pattern is pretty much the most common dispersion that we find in nature, and many animals spend much of their time in an environment that satisfies their requirements. So for instance, if you were to walk in Alvathorpe, you would see perhaps mushrooms growing clumped together on a log. That's because the log satisfies the needs of the mushroom. And forest insects such as salamanders are frequently clumped under logs as well, where it tends to be more moist and tends to be more moist in that area. So clumping is associated with gaining or getting the needed resources for those animals that are found more in one place. Another thing that clumping does is that it might be associated with mating behavior. For example, some insects swarm in great numbers to increase their mating chances because they're only living for a day or two, and when they do live for a day or two, they pretty much have to reproduce in that day or two, so you better hope that you find a mate pretty quickly. Group living also, and I talked about with the wolves and hunting. So let's talk a little bit about the uniform dispersion. Most result from direct interactions between individuals in the population, and we can associate that with territoriality, which animals often exhibit uniform dispersion as a result of kind of aggressive social interactions. It's the defense of a physical space against the encroachment of other individuals. So they're not as common in nature as you would think. Again, clumped seems to be the most common dispersion pattern. We can also talk about population growth rates, which gets a little bit into the demographics, factors that affect population growth rate. So if we were to take that change in population and put it over time, you would get a rate. And what affects population growth rate is the ratio of males to females, the generation time, at what age do females reproduce, and how many females are at a reproductive age in a particular cohort. A cohort I need you to think of as a group of individuals of a species that are born at the same time that you're taking data for over time. So imagine like all the kids in your kindergarten class, they would be your cohort, and you would follow their survivorship throughout first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up to, grade 12. And that therefore you could get some vital statistics that you could use to produce what's called a survivorship curve. And a survivorship curve, we're into the demographics portion here now. A survivorship curve is used to compare generations, populations, or even different species. They actually describe kind of the number of individuals that are surviving for that cohort, for that group of individuals that you've chosen to study that were born at the same time. And what we see is we see three patterns emerging. We see when we do plot the number of survivors using a log scale versus time, we see three patterns. Type 1 survivorship, we see, well, let me show you what they look like, survivorship curves. So we can see here that a type 1 survivorship curves, they exhibit high survivorship throughout their life cycle. So for this type 1 survivorship curve, you can see that most of the individuals are surviving to kind of most of their lifespan, and then they die off at mature ages. The type 2 survivorship curve is pretty constant. They have a constant proportion of individuals dying over time. Populations with type 3 survivorship curves have a really high mortality rate or death rate at very young ages. Now, what's interesting is that most real populations that we see are really a mixture of these three types. For example, juveniles of some species could be type 3, but then followed by type 2 survivorship for long-lived adults. I want to give you some examples of the type 1 survivorship curve. That would be humans in developed countries and animals in zoos. And when you look at humans in developed countries, we put a lot of effort into, a lot of energy invested into each offspring. And that results in most of these individuals surviving. Type 2 survivorship, the most common example used is rodents and birds, and again the proportion of individuals dying is pretty constant throughout their lifespan. And then you get this type 3 survivorship curve, which many thousands of individuals, most of whom die right away. That's an example that we see for fishes, seeds, and marine larvae. So they relatively little effort or parental care is invested in each individual. And type 1 and type 3 are characteristics of life histories known as R and K, and we'll talk about those next time. So I'm hoping that in this video today you learned about dispersion, density, and demographics, and I hope you recognize that those three characteristics of the population are not due by chance. They're due to the interacting biological processes that produce them.